The latest edition of the college football playoff rankings are out. We have a couple of big winners. North Carolina decides to make a change at head coach, and plenty of picks coming your way. This is the College Game Day podcast for Wednesday, November 27th. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel with you. A reminder, we encourage you to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss a single episode, or download wherever you prefer to get your podcast. Pete, not a lot of change at the top of the rankings. Actually, I said for Wednesday, November 27th, because that's when the people will be hearing, but you and I are recording on Tuesday night, shortly after the end of the College Football Playoff Top 25 show. Oregon is number one again, Ohio State just behind. And, you know, people can look, and we'll probably put it up on YouTube to look at the rankings. But I felt as if the two biggest winners from all of the upsets last weekend were Indiana and Tennessee. Tennessee was just on the outside. Now it would appear, with the game against Vanderbilt to go, that the Volunteers are firmly in the field and win, and they're in. And Indiana in a similar situation. And with Indiana falling from 5 to 10 with that one loss, it would indicate that the Hoosiers might have been in a little bit of trouble had Alabama and Ole Miss been able to take care of business, but they did not. And because of that, it looks as if Indiana just avoids tripping and falling on an old oaken bucket, that they're going to be in the first edition of the 12-team college football playoff.
Which, if you had told me that or predicted that in August,
goodness,
I would have called the paramedics straight to your residence. And all credit to Kurt Signetti for that. Just generational resuscitation. Like, we're talking about like Bill Snyder and Manhattan stuff here, stuff that just doesn't happen a lot. I definitely agree with that assessment, Rece. I also just think Clemson came straight out of nowhere. And they're not in the field yet, but they're sitting there with a handful of results impending this weekend that could get them A, in the ACC title game to win their way in, or B, sneak their way in. And I couldn't help but think tonight, watching the show, Rece, and I'm hijacking here, so bear with me.
Please.
Of Greg Sankey in Atlanta last year on College Game Day, saying one of these things is not like the other, the old Sesame Street line.
As you look at this right now, and we talk about the possibility, if Alabama were to upset Georgia, SEC being left out, what would be your response to that?
That's not the real world of college football.
What do you mean by that?
Well, let's go back to like Sesame Street. So we're really basic. One of these things is not like the other, and that's the Southeastern Conference. So we have 5 of the top 15.
That line went like triple viral, especially in college sports circles. In tonight's rankings, the snapshot of them would tell us that that thing is a lot like the other.
And I think it is closer to the other than it has been in the past. Now, the one thing I will say is that I think the SEC is significantly deeper than every other conference. But I don't think that it has the elite teams at the top. I think Georgia and Texas are elite. Tennessee's close. But everybody else needed to avoid messing up. And Ole Miss, in my judgment, should be elite. But for some reason, they haven't been able to finish games, and they have 3 losses. South Carolina.
3 bad losses, by the way.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, three bad losses. I mean, I'll even give them LSU, because LSU was weird because they never trailed in the game until the walk-off touchdown in overtime. Sort of a weird one. But when you take the weird one with the Florida loss, Florida's improved, shouldn't be beating a playoff team anywhere. No way Kentucky should have beaten them in Oxford, but they did. And so Ole Miss is going to have to live with that if they don't find a way to sneak their way in the back door here. South Carolina is the most improved team among that group in the SEC, yet sneaking in the back door for them is problematic because they got clobbered by Ole Miss at home and lost to Alabama. So, the SEC folks are going to be right in saying that it is more difficult for their teams on the road, particularly at night. That is a true statement. But you also have to perform a little bit better than some of these teams did at different times in order to take the decision out of the committee's hands. And I don't know that there is such a gap that you can overlook multiple bad performances, which is what all of those 3-loss SEC teams have.
So to reheat my old synopsis of the SEC is they've Scooby-Dooed themselves. The top isn't as dominant. The bottom is way better, right? Vanderbilt, way better.
Yeah.
Way better. And now everything's snug like a bug in a rug in the middle, like a sandwich squenched in Scooby-Doo, and it's kind of undistinguishable. And so, and that's, the story of college football in 2024. There's going to be documentaries made about this year. This year has been wild. It's been fascinating. It's been fun. And the SEC is still by far the best league, and it's the deepest league by far. But if the teams in the upper middle class have not distinguished themselves to earn a spot, and that's what the committee is telling us, right? That the trio of 3-loss teams, and I've still kind of been on the bandwagon that one of these 3-loss teams ends up in there somehow.
They may still get in.
Yeah.
We need to point that out. They're not They're not done. They're not done.
What was Ward's stat? I wrote it down and then forgot. I think 22 3-loss teams in the top 12 in the 10-year history. Does that sound right?
Yeah, he was ready. He was ready for the 3-loss team questions for sure. And I think the thing is, too, there are potential trickle downs from this, because the knee-jerk reaction among athletic directors in the SEC will be, okay, if we're the deepest and it's hardest here, and we're not going to get grace for playing each other and it's hard, then we're not going to go out and risk, losses on the other side. Now, their contract's already signed and all of that, so I'm not trying to say the sky's falling right now, but you can see the point.
Oh yeah,
I mean, there are points on both sides. It's real easy to watch Ole Miss at Florida Saturday, and certainly to watch Alabama in Norman Saturday night and say that's not a playoff team. That's not a playoff team. But the counter argument is also fair that the schedules of the other teams aren't as difficult. I think right now that Clemson has defeated one team that's going to a bowl. Is that right?
One power conference team. Yeah, I'm not sure if like App State or one of their earlier games is going to a bowl, but it's one Power 4 bowl team for Clemson. Yeah. And what I thought and maybe hoped, Rece, was that this committee might rethink the way we rank, and they just haven't. Like they've been consistent, so I give them credit for that. I've been sort of consistently underwhelmed by their sort of macro creativity, and I'm not saying they're doing a terrible job, but what I'm saying is, like, I thought it wouldn't look like one loss, 2 losses, 2 losses.
They stuck the 2-loss SEC teams ahead of SMU's leading the ACC, ahead of Indiana.
Yeah, but that's kind of obvious.
Okay, well, how would you rank them differently? What would be the big change if Pete Thamel were sitting in the room?
Well, I think you'd want to take a closer look at the 3-loss SEC teams against Clemson, right? When you look at the periphery of that, how does Georgia compare to Miami? I think is like a really fair comp when you start diving in on strength of schedule. And what is Miami's best win? Well, it's better now. It's Florida, right? On the road. That we couldn't have said that with a lot of conviction. Now, to me, that as a best win doesn't touch Georgia going and mollywopping Texas and Austin as a as a best win. But look, Georgia has underwhelmed too at different moments and have been inconsistent. I just think like that conversation, 1-loss Miami versus 2-loss Georgia, Tennessee is something that I would love to like really have fleshed out how they ended up there and why. And you can lump Penn State and Notre Dame in there too, because Penn State has some like very good upper middle class wins, and so does Notre Dame. Notre Dame obviously has a horrific loss. Penn State has a really good loss, and there was some Twitter sort of chatter about Notre Dame versus Penn State. I didn't feel convicted about Notre Dame leapfrogging Penn State, although Notre Dame has played really well. I just can't forget about that loss because it happened a while ago. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I've got Georgia number 4, and
Okay.
I considered putting Georgia number 3 because of the way they handled Texas. But Texas got whipped by an excellent Georgia team, and other than that, while Texas has had a far easier schedule than Georgia, I mean that's not close. But they also haven't, they haven't really turned in any stinkers. Georgia, turned in a stinker at Ole Miss, good team, but kind of did at Kentucky too, and did for 2.5 quarters at Alabama too. So I ended up leaving them 4. That'll sort itself out, assuming that Texas, well, it'll sort itself out either way because Texas will either win against Texas A&M and play for the SEC championship, or they won't, and then it'll be obvious. So, but I think that, and I have Tennessee ranked a little bit higher. I think I have them 6 and probably,
and that's what I'm saying is just everything has fallen into line like a century of AP votes, basically, right? In my opinion, and so. I was just hoping that, and I really think Greg Sankey, quite frankly, was thinking like the committee, he was pretty vocal in encouraging the committee to think different and to think out of traditional paradigms. And I just don't think the committee has landed there. And Tony Petitti had talked about that too, but Tony Petitti's like horses look safe in the stable right now, right? As long as everybody takes care of business. Greg's are less certain, and it will be interesting to see the rhetoric and ripples. He came out with a tweet last week, with some strength of schedule numbers and, essentially like some statistics that said one of these things is not like the other. Yeah. So
it's a huge...
and I empathize with that too. Like I'm not really convicted behind much in this, but like I get the SEC's case, just like I get the Big Ten's case, and just like I understand where the ACC sits. Like you have to sit back and see everything. Saw the comments from Brett Yormark. Like I do think the Big 12 will end up leapfrogging Boise. I just think that that it may not, but that's my opinion.
Boy, Heather Dinich brought up the point tonight.
Chaos.
People need to know that the 5 highest ranked conference champions are not guaranteed to the Power 4. And if you look down in the ranking, Tulane is sneaking around there. What happens if you have a 3-loss Big 12 champion? And Tulane runs the table and wins the American Athletic Conference as a 2-loss champion. Now, I am not projecting, as we stand here today, that they would get that 5th highest ranked spot and bump out the Big 12, but I am saying it could open the door for that debate, and people need to know the rules, that it's not a reservation for the Power 4 conference.
I wanted to present the other side of it, that Tulane does have 2 losses to Power 4 teams. The 2 Power 4 games they played, they lost. One to Kansas State, who's, a game out of the mix. Everybody's in the mix in the Big 12 at the top, but Kansas State, probably going to sort of finish, also ran in the Big 12, and Oklahoma is, despite its good performance against Alabama, is at the bottom of the SEC. So I think that will end up hurting Tulane.
Well, they also have no good wins.
Right.
Like, I want to say that. Like, they beat Navy. They have no power conference wins.
No marquee wins.
No marquee wins is the right way to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, and so it'll be difficult, but it was a great point that she brought up, because they're close enough, and it's just a good reminder that if for whatever reason, the Big 12 champion was deemed not to be as good as Boise State, or ranked ahead of Boise State, and not ranked ahead of Tulane, if Tulane were to beat Army and win the American, then they wouldn't get in. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Big 12 champion like you is going to get in. I think, and I also agree, more likely than not, that the Big 12 champion will get one of the 4 byes. I think more likely than not. Not predicting it. I'm just saying I think that, I agree with you. I think that is the likely.
I'll predict it. You don't have to. Yeah. You have to go on the show. I can predict it.
No, I don't mind predicting it. It's just that I'm not certain how it, there's
a lot of variables, as we learned last week.
Yeah.
So
I think it depends on who it is. I think it depends on which champion that it is. Yeah. If it's, if it's one of the 3-loss teams that sort of stumbled in there on a tiebreaker, that's one thing. If it's Red Hot Arizona State, then that's probably an entirely different thing. All right. enough with the rankings. We've got another set coming out next week, and then you'll still have also the final ones, which will be the most important ones. Before we get to picks, I want to make this point too before we pick. The most important pick we'll make as it pertains to the college football playoff rankings will be South Carolina and Clemson. The game's at Clemson.
Sure.
It's going to be a really big deal for perception of the ACC, SEC, and all of that.
You would have called the paramedics, or I would have. You should have called the paramedics if you had called me when I was watching on my phone the end of South Carolina Old Dominion. I forget where I was.
Yeah,
week one, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
it
week
was.
One.
And
it was in flux. Where were we week one for game day?
That was College Station, because week 0 was Dublin, then we went to College Station.
Yes, that's right.
Notre Dame.
So I was on my way home, I think. And anyway, I remember being like, oh my gosh, they could win this game. There's 4 minutes left, and Old Dominion has a chance to beat South Carolina. So if you had called me that and said, Pete, right around Thanksgiving week, we're going to be talking about South Carolina's playoff chances, I would have been like, what? But that's the beauty of this insanity we've invited in. I saw a funny tweet tonight. It was like, before the season, Arizona State fans were like, please God, get us to a bowl, Kenny. And now they're like, fix your clock management, Kenny.
Yeah, that's the truth too, by the way. I don't know what was going on there. Anyway, we've talked about that already in the earlier podcast this week, so I'll give Kenny a break the rest of the way. I like Kenny very much. I think he's an excellent coach, and I hope he never does anything like that again.
Move forwards, not bad.
Yeah, the other story prior to us making some picks was the decision to move on from Mack Brown at North Carolina. I mean, he was fired, right? I mean,
he was fired, Rece. Yeah, there's no gray area there. I don't think North Carolina wanted to fire Mack Brown.
No, they did not. No, they did not. It just worked out that way. They
correct.
Wanted to stay. They felt he wanted to stay. They felt like it was time to move on. What do you make of all of this?
There was a lot of rumblings the last 2 weeks of Mack telling people on his staff that he was coming back, and Mack even saying in his press conference, yes, do you intend to come back last season? But what was absent from all that rhetoric were the wide open invitations for North Carolina to be like, yes, we look forward to Mack Brown returning. There was none of that, and there was nothing from the school. And so I think mid-season, after the JMU loss and the Duke loss, I was pretty convicted that Mack was going to be gone one way or another. And I wrote that when I did a mid-season carousel thing. And, Mack gobbled up some power back with some wins. And I think Mack really wanted to stay, and he thought he could win his way for one more year to go out the way he wanted. But, I mean, quite frankly, 8 miles from my house here, they were down 41-7 in the second half of Boston College. They were a non-competitive football team against a mediocre ACC team, and they were a non-competitive football team against James Madison, who's a good but not great Sun Belt team, right? And they gave up 70 at home. And I just think the Carolina brass, when you take out the emotion and take out the sentimentality, just said, we need to change the direction of where we're going. Mack, I believe, is 73 and the oldest coach in all of college football. And Carolina feels like their job is better than 3-4 in the ACC and 6-5 going into the last week. And I do think, Bubba Cunningham obviously made this decision, but I think he's doing it in concert with leadership and a board that is not just focused on the ACC. There's a next step for Carolina if the whole world shakes differently. And those things aren't talked about a lot, but I think they loom large in a lot of these decisions as they go. And UNC needs its football program to be in the top 25. It needs its football program to be competitive and attractive. And they've been good under Mack Brown, and they've had some really nice moments under Mack Brown. I think they made 6 straight bowls. He's done a very good job. They are much better. He will leave them much better than when he arrived after Larry Fedora, which really, really spiraled at the end. So, look, I mean, I don't know a lot of people who say, "Man, I had a great divorce," right? In college football, firings are like that. And Carolina is only going to pay him, and this is only in Jimbo Fisher land, right? $3 million to go. 2.8, I think, was the math. About 900,000 base for 3-ish years. So as Carolina goes, that's for a Hall of Fame coach and a little bit of an awkward exit. That's a pretty clean getaway. Now, I always imagine, and you probably did too, Rece, that Mack Brown would, you know, be coach emeritus and have an office and kind of be able to be Mack Brown and fundraise and golf with the boosters and, do all that stuff. And maybe everybody comes back and holds hands and sings Kumbaya after this, and he does that. I don't know how that's going to all shake out in the macro. So I think like Mack Brown not being the coach of Carolina in 2025 is not surprising to me. Like, is it surprising he was like fired, less than 24 hours from saying he intended to be back? Yes, that's surprising because it's almost like a very un-Carolina move, right? Like that's just Carolina's not like it's not like Auburn with coordinators, right? It's not a kneecap kind of place. So, and I think that tells you like it's a little window into their conviction and a little bit of their annoyance in how he handled the last 2 weeks.
I think that's the biggest thing, Pete. And this is my perspective from the outside, is that it looked as if he tried to force their hand after maybe some early disillusionment in the season led them to believe that everybody was sort of on the same page and that, it was going to be handled gracefully and all of that. And then when he changed his mind, it looked like he was trying to force their hand. You force people's hand. If they're not on board with it, then sometimes things get handled in a manner that you would have preferred they didn't, that you would like for it to have been a little bit more as you described, and you pushed people to a position where they felt like they had to make a decision. And I feel like that's what it looks like to me that happened at Carolina's. Mack thought he had enough power to sort of steamroll his way through, and he didn't. Maybe you don't lose to Boston College in that way. Maybe you do. Maybe another game here or there. Maybe you do. But in this case, he didn't. And so now, before we move on to picks, who's getting that job?
Well, it's interesting. North Carolina is the belle of the ball, and we'll find out probably, in the weeks after the job is filled, whether this was a factor in it. But they right now have their pick of the whole market, which is a pretty attractive thing for Carolina. I think. We talked about Carolina job on this podcast a couple weeks ago, Rece, and I said, Bubba Cunningham's phone would be blowing up because people love the Carolina job. It's sort of the East Coast Arizona State, the sleeping giant that nobody is quite nudged awake yet. And I think Carolina's last ACC title was like 81.
80 is great.
80. Okay. A long, long, long time ago. So, but look, part of the attraction. And I know there's people in the SEC that think this way about the Carolina job. Part of the attraction of that job is your schedule has on it, Duke, Syracuse, and Georgia Tech, and it does not have on it Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Florida, right? Like the same things we were talking about, like the middle class of the SEC is definitively better than the middle class of the ACC. I don't think that's an argument. I don't think Jim Phillips would try to argue that with us, right? So you get a great job and a great place to live and a great brand. Kids want to wear the jump man. They want to wear those colors. In a very fertile recruiting area. North Carolina is one of the 10 most populous states in the country. There's players in Charlotte. There's players in the Triangle. There's players in the rural areas there. There's players in North Carolina, and those players grow up wanting to play at Carolina. So it's a long way to say it would be really interesting to see if there is a power coach who emerges from a P4 league as a head coach to go to Carolina to change things up. Some of those names might be Dave Clawson, PJ Fleck, a guy like, who's had very good success in those things. Now, Clawson struggled the last couple of years, but the people in Tobacco Road know his track record pretty well. Does an SEC coach take an off ramp and say, you know what, like, I'm sick of this Scooby-Doo sandwich that we talked about. Let's, let's go to Carolina and see if we can flip the switch and maximize it. I'd be curious what Bubba's NIL pitch is, because Carolina's going to have to dedicate some money to basketball now. Like, let's, they know what drives the bus there still. And it's one of the few. Now, football generally drives the bus, but basketball is going to get more attention there, just like places like Kentucky, Arizona, Syracuse, Duke, where there's going to have to be some real estate pushed there. So I think Mid-major wise, like what's your list, right? I think John Summerall's on that list from Tulane. He's done an excellent job, 2 straight Sun Belts, and has a shot to win the American. I think Bob Chesney going to hang 70 in their stadium gets him on the list, right? From James Madison. One big at Holy Cross, which is kind of like a little bit of it's private, but a little bit of similar vibe to Carolina in that sort of East Coast corridor way. Our friend Barry Odom, friend of the pod from earlier in the year. I think Jeff Monken from Army, that what he's done there will get them a look. Let me say this: Arthur Smith, the old Falcons coach, played at Carolina, and I've heard internally there's some momentum for him being a name there. And then I think your coordinator names like Al Golden, Glenn Schumann, guys like that. I don't think Carolina ends up hiring a coordinator, but I think those could be the types of names that end up there.
I'd make and this is not from inside information at all. I'd make a run at Matt Campbell.
Interesting.
He seemed, I think he would. There are places that I've heard him connected to, like when he was connected to USC a couple of years ago.
That was close, by the way.
I know, and I didn't understand it. I thought that's not a good fit. This, I think, is. Now maybe he doesn't want it. Maybe they're not interested in him. But I would kick the tires there. And
Jamie Chadwell was the one I missed. Been a head coach in the Carolinas a bunch. Look, prolific guy, play caller. Has found a way to move the ball and win games at a lot of different stops in a pretty close radius to there. So anyway, I knew I forgot somebody. So that's like a general list. But for right now, if Purdue doesn't open, I don't think Virginia Tech opens. For right now, Carolina is in a very weird spot for Thanksgiving week to potentially being the only job on the board.
If this had happened 1 year earlier, maybe they would have just looked 8 or 9 miles down the road and see if they could lure the erstwhile Duke coach, now the boss of the Texas A&M Aggies, Mike Elko, which brings us to our Thanksgiving weekend picks. Let's start with where College Game Day will be, Pete. Texas and Texas A&M. The Longhorns are favored by 6. This is a resumption of a rivalry that stopped in 2011 after A&M moved to the SEC and is now resuming. It is full of arrogance and insecurity, bitterness, vitriol, unmitigated disdain for one another, and all of the things that you would expect. The Longhorns believing that they are a social class above the Aggies resenting the heck out of that, and all of it mixed together with a trip to the SEC championship game on the line, which A&M has never been to in their time in the SEC, and Texas trying to go for the first time in its first year in the league. So who wins the game?
All the Thanksgiving sides of hatred.
Yeah.
So delicious. I think Texas A&M wins the game, Rece. I really do. I feel like Texas A&M's defensive line combined with that environment. Now, again, I said this is why they would beat Notre Dame too in the opener. So, listen with your own peril. But I just can't get out of my mind what happened to Texas's offensive line in that Georgia game. And Georgia's D-line was healthy really for the first time all year. And Michael Williams looked like the Michael Williams that has the evaluators salivating. But I really feel like the disruption combined with the environment, and we'll give an update on game day on Saturday. I've been told that Quinn Ewers is expected to play. He has a low-grade ankle sprain, but he's not going to be 100%. So that's certainly going to be a factor. But I think this game is going to be weird. I think it's going to be wild. I think it's going to be ugly, sloppy, like a lot of these like big hype games end up being. I think it's going to be a mud fight. And I think the running quarterback at A&M, Marcel Reed, gives them an advantage to gut out an upset win.
I mentioned a lot of the adjectives that describe this rivalry, but one of the things that drove A&M to the SEC, other than the fact that you're just going to do because it's going financially attractive for you at the time, was to get out from underneath Texas' shadow. They felt as if Texas had its thumb on the scale forever in the old SWC and the Big 12 after that, and this was a chance for A&M to strike out on its own. That's one of the reasons that they haven't played the rivalry since A&M left. A&M wasn't thrilled, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they were overly delighted and ready to roll out the maroon carpet in order to bring Texas into the SEC.
No, no, no. They were pissed, I think would be the artful term for it. Pissed.
Yes. So here they are.
They finally got out of Big Brother's shadow, and they finally cut their own identity.
And Big Brother comes in the first year, and you know what they get? They get the best schedule you can possibly imagine in the SEC, save having Georgia come to them. And now they're playing for the SEC championship, and all of these night games on the road, so tough to go in to Williams-Brice Stadium at night, and A&M went in and lost. So tough to go into the haunted mansion of Jordan-Hare, and A&M did it and lost. It's even tough to go to Arkansas because Tennessee's going to the playoff, and they lost. Alabama went on the road to Oklahoma at night, a bad Oklahoma team, playoff within Alabama's grasp, and they lost. Night games in the SEC. Guess who's playing their first night road game of the season? Texas. Texas is going in there, all of the resentment, all of the bitter feelings, all of the things at stake for the Aggies, who forever, they haven't won a national championship since the 30s. They haven't won a conference championship since 1998. And as good as this season has been, if they lose to Texas, they're just the 8-4 Aggies again, just the 8-4 Aggies. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're going to be. Texas is going to win the game on the road.
Ooh, and Akron just beat Toledo, by the way.
There you go. I love that you're watching.
Oh yeah, no, I got a little Tuesday action. We don't have much of it left, so we need to treasure it. What you do for a action game in like mid-May on a Wednesday, right? So
you can watch the old replays.
That's fair.
Clean old-fashioned hate. Georgia Tech and Georgia. We will talk South Carolina and Clemson in a minute being significant in terms of the SEC, ACC, and how the committee might use this for evaluation. Well, this Georgia Tech team just beat Miami a few weeks ago. Miami is sitting there ranked just ahead of Georgia. Won't matter. Miami can win its way in the ACC, but where everybody is ranked and thus seeded might matter depending on how it all shakes out. Georgia Tech and Georgia, the Bulldogs favored by almost 20 points on Friday night. What do you think?
I really like Tech to cover in this game. Tech played them close last year. Haynes King is playing with one good wing, and we obviously saw some quarterback rotation there to get a little more pass game for Georgia Tech last week. But I think I trust Georgia Tech to shorten a game and make it close. Like that's one thing that they have showed me consistently that they can do. And Aaron Philo has shown that he can throw the ball. And there's post Haynes King, and we're not wishing him away because he's got another year. There's a bright future at Georgia Tech. So we're going to I'm gonna take the Bulldogs to win, but I am convicted about the points with the Yellow Jackets.
I totally agree. No need for me to delve any further into it. Georgia hasn't really made it a habit to blow out anybody. Tech's good. Tech's a good, solid team, and shortening the game is what they'll do. Although I do think that some of the comments during the week will have the dogs on edge, and they're ready to go to the SEC championship game. Where what did Brent Key say that the least favorite thing to do? The one thing he hated was to be asked about Georgia football. So I mean, it's good. Clean old-fashioned hate. I
mean, it's rivalry.
I like it. Bad. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Bad. I'll take Georgia, win the game. Decisively, but not by enough. South Carolina and Clemson. The game is in Death Valley. Last time the Gamecocks went in there, they won the game behind Spencer Rattler in what was a wild game. I don't know for sure that I can see South Carolina getting over the hump absent a bunch more losses for other teams kind of on the edge of that at-large pool. but they might have a big impact on who does get one of the last one or two at-large bids.
Mm-hmm.
And Clemson, if it's going to have a case, we touched on this earlier, they don't have a big-time Power 4 win. This would count. What do you think happens between the Gamecocks and the Tigers?
Belated congratulations for staying on Ward Manual about the conference championship thing. Because a week from now on the podcast, that's going to be a much bigger deal. And then a week from then on the podcast, that's going to be a much bigger deal. So I appreciate there's it takes a certain gumption to just ask the same question over and over again.
I told him tonight, I'm asking you every week. Yeah. Everybody thought it was just because of the SEC, but now it has to do with the ACC also.
No, it's a big deal. It still was jarring how badly Clemson lost to Louisville at home at night a few weeks back. It was just like Clemson doesn't lose home games. Like it just was a little disorienting to see that and to see how Clemson has wilted against the tough competition it's faced has been a little bit. It makes me a little nervous, but still, like South Carolina's just had the weirdest season, man. The weirdest season. So I am going to take Clemson in a close game. I feel like Cade Klubnik's going to figure out a way to move the ball, and I think their offense is designed to where those defensive ends for South Carolina won't be able to wreak as much havoc. I think they'll get the ball out quick. They'll roll it down to Wesco and Antonio Williams, and Phil Maffa can take advantage maybe of some of that, some of South Carolina's eagerness. So I'm going to take Clemson, but not convicted.
South Carolina has already won 5 in a row. Wow. If they win their 6th in a row, it would match their longest single season win streak in the last 40 seasons. These two don't face off as ranked opponents very often. When they do, the Gamecocks, surprisingly to me, are 5-1 in AP ranked matchups against Clemson, because Clemson historically has been the dominant team. I feel like I'm not a gambler, as we've talked about, but you know how people talk about chasing bets when you're like a step late to the party, and I feel like that's what I'm about to do. I'm going to go with South Carolina.
Okay.
But I feel like I'm a step late, because there is a gut feeling in me, and maybe this is a little bit of institutional bias, or maybe a better way to say it, institutional respect for what Clemson has been pretty much in the entire Dabo Swinney era, but certainly since their first trip to the national championship game, and institutional lack of respect for confidence that South Carolina can avoid, the chicken curse, and avoid, making something bad happen when there's a lot of good there to be had. I'm gonna go with those edges wreaking enough havoc, and Clemson having as much trouble getting Lenore Sellers on the ground as everybody else has had so far. So I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with the trendier pick and take South Carolina.
How different is this season if Lenore Sellers doesn't leave that LSU game and play the second half?
No question. Hugely different. They might be in the playoff. They might have a playoff spot like that. They might be in the SEC championship game.
Yeah.
If that had not happened, they would be a 2-loss team. They're very, very close to beating Alabama. The only game where the Old Dominion game that you mentioned, or it was Old Dominion, right? The first game.
It was, I believe, it was Old Dominion.
Yeah. So the first game they didn't play well, and then they got throttled by Ole Miss. And
Billy
other
Clumpton.
than that, other than that, they were really, really good. Miami, Syracuse. Canes win. They're in the ACC championship game. If they lose, it's Clemson against SMU.
You will not catch me feeling sentimental, Rece, although I will harken back to covering the Miami-Syracuse game my senior year in the Artist, then known as the Carrier Dome. Now it's a wireless company dome. Syracuse won, I believe, like 63-13. I know you had it in your game day note this year. It was some preposterous score. Donovan McNabb ran wild. They had good players at Syracuse then: Keith Bullock, Donovan Darius, Rob Conrad. That was a tour de force, and really one of the last stake in the ground highlights for that program. Fran Brown has done an excellent job this year. I don't see them having athlete for athlete a way to stay with Miami. I would, whatever the over under is, I would bet the over because I think both teams are going to move the ball. Miami's shown a vulnerability to effective offenses, but I just think Cam Ward with his arms and his legs is going to be a little bit too much for Syracuse.
I'd probably take Syracuse in the points because I think it'll be a high-scoring game, but you're talking about a matchup of the top two passers in the country. Kyle McCord
He's been
is
awesome,
throwing for nearly 360 yards a game, and Cam Ward is right behind them. Both of them have set the single-season passing yardage record at their respective schools. Both of their pass defenses rank about the same. The one thing that Miami has done is they have come up with 14 interceptions, which is tied for the 11th in the country. McCord's thrown some interceptions. So I think that and the Syracuse defense maybe not quite being what Miami's is. I'm gonna say I'd probably take the points if I were a gambler, but I'm not. But I think Miami wins the game and goes on to the ACC championship game. What about Michigan and Ohio State? Ryan Day, when he was on our show last week, Pete, was talking about how he laid things out for the team, and the first thing he said was win the rivalry game. Nick Saban had a visceral reaction to that, as if like maybe that's not the way he would have looked at it, but win the rivalry game, which is something they haven't done the last 3 years. So, what do you think happens? Is that an easy win for the Bucks?
I don't think it's an easy win. I feel like the Caleb Downs punt return against Indiana, and you were in the stadium, so you can. I felt watching at home that punt return, you could feel the whole state of Ohio exhale. Does that make sense? Everything from that point, I was like, okay, we can go. And I think there is going to be, if Ohio State is going to cruise in this game, as the bettors project that they are, I would think there's going to have to be some moment like that early, whether it's a turnover from, forcing Davis Warren into a bad situation and whatnot. Two things to watch in this game, Rece, as we're sitting here Tuesday night, and I said this on GameDay on Saturday, Will Johnson not expected to play. He's been battling a nagging toe injury. And Colston Loveland left the Northwestern game, didn't come out on the field at halftime. I would say he's also unlikely to play right now. So those are obviously the two best players on their roster. You could maybe, throw in Mason Graham or a defensive tackle, right? Or, in that conversation. But those are two huge blows, especially Loveland to that offense, which just doesn't have the skill on the outside to move the ball. They are deficient at receiver. They're obviously deficient at quarterback. I think they're 128th or 9th in the country in passing. And that might have been going into last week. They might have padded that a little bit against Northwestern. But I will say that Ohio State ekes out a cover in this, wins, something like 31-7. And it does end up covering the number. But I do think it slogs around for a few quarters before they get there.
Ohio State hasn't shown a propensity to blow anyone out.
Fair.
And still, with all of the changes, and Ohio State has had more starting lineups and more offensive line combinations this year than they've had in the last 2 years combined. The one thing Michigan can still do is give your offensive line problems with Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, and company up front. But you're not beating that team if you can't put some points on the board. There are too many weapons, too much firepower. I say that Ryan Day finally makes life a little bit easier. I saw another quote from him today talking about how miserable it's been when they lose to Michigan. I think they get a reprieve and they win that game. A lot of combinations and permutations about who can win the Big 12. Kansas State and Iowa State in Jack Trice Stadium. Does Iowa State stake its claim and hope everything falls its way? So, and they don't need a lot of help. Everybody needs a little, it seems. So, does Iowa State win that game?
I think they do, Rece. I think they do. But I think, like most Farmageddons, it'll be a little bit of a wild slog. I'm glad you didn't quiz me on the Big 12 tiebreakers, by the way. I didn't take a lot of math classes in college. So
there are what was it? It was like 120. No,
a lot,
dozens and dozens, and there's a 1 in 1,270 chance that there is an 8-way tie. And yes, it was 128 different permutations of the final standings.
Wow. Because West Virginia can still make it, right?
The Pat tells me they can.
That's what Pat says, yeah. So
yeah.
I trust Pat's math.
I haven't seen that path.
Yeah, I didn't fact check Pat there, but in his heart, West Virginia's country road can go to the playoffs. So give me the Cyclones.
And I'm going to take the Cyclones too. I think the Cyclones take care of business and make it in. I assume we're not picking upsets with Arizona State. The most likely championship game is Arizona State, Iowa State, but there are, as I said, a ton of other combinations. Notre Dame at USC, Irish favored by 7.5. Afternoon game, just afternoon in Los Angeles. The Irish have been on a steady upward ascent since that loss to Northern Illinois. What happens against the Trojans?
So part of me, the wise guy in me, wants to say, like, this is the time things go together for USC and they make a play. But then when Notre Dame's up 14-0 in the middle of the first quarter, I'm going to remember those picks we talk about where in your gut, you're just like, once the game starts, that would be that pick. So I'm going to take Notre Dame, but I really thought about it for USC. There is a power to playing free like the Trojans are playing right now.
I'm going to go with the upset. And I think I've talked about it way too much, so it's probably going to be like one of those, why did I do that? All 5 of USC's losses this year by 1 possession. They've lost by a total of 19 points, and they've had the lead in the fourth quarter of every one of those losses. That's the most, it's tied for the most losses when leading in the fourth quarter this season with, you guessed it, the Kansas Jayhawks. So much history in this series. There've been some upsets, certainly. I'm going to say that USC wins and puts Notre Dame on the bubble. Don't know that they'll knock them out of the playoff, but they'll lead. They will spend an anxious week wondering whether they're going to make the field. I'm going to say SC gets one barely against the Irish.
I could totally see that happen.
It's one of those where I wish I'd been a little bit sneakier about it, because now I've looked at it and thought about it so much, and so much you think surely one of these games SC's going to get, like that, and maybe they won't. Maybe Notre Dame has improved so much, that they're going to be able to go in and steamroll. But they're like, it's been a while, but the Trojans spoiled a lot of Irish seasons. They were like a 15-year span between, mid-60s and 1980, where USC sort of made it their business to spoil Notre Dame's season. So we'll flash back a little bit.
Boy, that's a light resume if Notre Dame has 2 losses.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing. That's why I think
academies,
really nervous. Yeah, and
and obviously the great win. I don't want to discount.
Yeah, a great win at Texas A&M. But if Texas beats A&M, then it's still a great win, but maybe not as great.
Very good win.
It's an excellent win no matter what.
Yes.
But like super ultra elite, we beat the team in their place that's playing for the SEC championship. That's ultra elite. 4-loss A&M that loses by 10 points to Texas at home, is a little less so. And they were certainly hurt by Florida State not being any good. They were hurt probably a little bit by Louisville after Louisville's a good team, but then after Louisville tripped up at Stanford, it doesn't look as good, that kind of thing. So really, the Irish need a good performance. They'll win and they'll be in. A loss is going to put them on the bubble, and then we'll see. Pete, last thing before we go, you're not a sweets guy. We're going to do a Thanksgiving food bracket on game day Saturday.
Whoa,
truly we are. So if you were in the Thanksgiving food committee room, number 1 seat. I mean, it's obvious that it's turkey. Do you like turkey?
Like turkey. Yeah, okay. Like turkey. I'm not I don't want an unconventional meat, but my favorite Thanksgiving food, Rece, is mashed potatoes. And I know that's controversial. I am Irish, half Irish, grew up in a meat and potatoes house. I love mashed potatoes. Now, some of it is because I'm old and fat. I don't eat a lot of potatoes, so I really cherish them on the holidays. And yeah, I love delicious mashed potatoes. A little bit of gravy. You can kind of mix them in with the vegetables. They're like a vehicle, but that's the star of dinner for me. Like stuffing, like cranberry, has to be real.
Real cranberries are key. Oh, there are people who don't even know that exist. My wife makes it like real cranberry sauce with the actual cranberries. Delicious.
Yeah. We don't have a lot going for us in Massachusetts, but we got a lot of cranberries around here.
Yeah,
so
those are good. My favorite's the sweet potato casserole that my wife makes. But I love.
We have talked about that on many podcasts.
Oh yeah, I know it. I love to eat.
I don't even like sweet potatoes, and I want to try it.
Yeah. Hey, listen. We'll let the listeners behind the curtain for game day a little bit. I need you to be close by and mic'd up for a cameo appearance when we're doing that, because there are some real vitriolic anti-mashed potato takes out there, and so we're going
a lot of opinions.
We might need you to make an appearance and do a walk on like the old talk shows when the guest comedian, hey, look, it's Pete Thamel. Hey, he didn't know he was coming. So there you go. So I will leave.
I'm on Team Potato. It's I won't spoil it because I think I know who likes the potatoes. But yeah, I'm on Team Potato. I'm not going to flinch in the face of criticism.
In the face of a potato. All right.
Stand by Pat O'Hara's mashed potatoes.
It's a delicious thing, but still the number one seed is turkey, because we love to eat the turkey because it's good. We love to eat the turkey like a good boy should, because it's turkey to eat. So good. Turkey D. Turkey nap. We eat that turkey and we take a nap. I don't know if the music department's going to get upset or not. They tell us we can't sing sometimes, but I think they're wrong about that. It's an Adam Sandler classic. I think so. Yeah. Let's eat the turkey in my big brown shoe, because it's turkey.
We're going to play that for Teddy this week. We're trying to get him off, pouches and cookies, which is basically his whole diet. So
yeah, I hope all of you at home love to eat the turkey and spend time with the people that you love and friends and family, and celebrate and be thankful for all that we've been given. And it is abundant. Thanks for joining the College Game Day podcast. Look forward to seeing you from College Station on Saturday morning, the revival and renewal of one of the great college football rivalries with the Longhorns and the Aggies. We'll see you Saturday.